Welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. I'm your host, Ankur Shah Delight. This is season 6, and get ready, everybody, because season 6 is where we recognize not only the inevitability of conflict, but we see its transcendent potential. That's right. The only way out is through. Welcome back, everybody, to the first interview of season 6. This is 10,000 Heroes, and as you may know, I want to devote this season to conflict. I took this course in mediation with Ken Cloak recently. Totally blew my mind. I've been converted. The light has been revealed to me, and now I see every conflict as an integral part of my spiritual path, and I'm committed not to avoid, but to engage with an open heart, which of course is incredibly difficult. I fail every day. But by extension, I think not only this is my spiritual path, but your spiritual path, and the whole point of what we're here to do as humans, because it can't just be a partial realization. So my guest today is Greg Thomas. He's a musician, he's a producer, he's a scholar. I actually didn't know that much about him before this interview, but he was brought to me by Jeff Salzman. So of course, anyone Jeff Salzman says I should talk to, I will. And he just totally blew me away. I mean, I fell in love with this guy, and I think you will too. So what I loved most was how he reframed villainy and antagonism as just essential parts of any heroic journey. And so if the hero's journey is our lives, and we're all growing and living to be heroes, and part of that heroism is engaging in conflict, the idea that there's this other person on the other side of the conflict, the antagonist, as he calls it, is essential. Because we can't grow without the conflict. We cannot grow without the antagonism. He makes that really clear. He puts it in terms of jazz music and also in Joseph Campbell-ish terms. So that's beautiful. Pay attention to that. And I mean, what it means is that you need to look out and get ready to be grateful for every difficult person and difficult moment you experience, because that's the logical corollary of what Greg is saying, is that every one of those things is a gift. So I love that. And what I appreciated most about Greg personally was his vulnerability. I mean, he could have stayed high and talked about jazz, talked about racialization, talked about conflict, philosophy, which we did a lot of. But then he got out of the abstract. He went really deep, really personal, talked about his relationships, his journey, polyamory, monogamy, parenthood, success, failure. He just really went there. And I love people that are willing to go there with me. And I'm really grateful, Greg, that you did that. And, you know, I think that's the rarer commodity, because there's a lot of intellect in the world. There's a lot of great analysis, but this honesty and this sincerity and this willing to be just alive and true in the moment, I really value that. So thank you. Thank you, Greg. I'm delighted to present this interview to you.
Pleased to meet you, Ankur.
Pleased to meet you. And this is kind of a funny way to meet you, because I mean, an interview on Zoom is always a funny way to meet someone. But
Right.
I'm learning how to do cold dips.
Cold dips. No, I'm not familiar.
So I just walked into the ocean near my house.
Mm-hmm.
Just cold. It's like 46 degrees. And I spent 2 minutes in the ocean, up to my neck. And now I'm very cold.
Okay.
I'm like shivering. My teeth are like,
boy. Okay.
I just took this hot shower before our call, and I'm still just very cold.
Oh boy. All right. Okay.
I was told that I was going to feel amazing for 6 hours. And it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be like you did this awesome workout. You're going to feel amazing.
That's not yet, huh? Not yet. It's probably different, different strokes for different folks, different responses, for folks. So you just never know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this is a new season starting today. I took the last month off to reevaluate what I was doing. And I think what I'd like, and so I say I think because I haven't fully decided, because this is the beginning. But what I'd like is to focus this season on conflict. And that's partly because I just took this week-long advanced mediation seminar with a guy who's like one of the foremost mediators. And he's just, it's just so deep. And my feeling after getting out of that class was that conflict is a spiritual path. And it's something that we encounter individually in our lives every day, usually. And then also as a society. And that the only way out is through. And so our orientation towards conflict is really like I will benefit if I look at the conflict that comes to me with gratitude and be like, all right, what gift can I pull from this experience? So this is something I haven't tried before, but I'd love if you're open to kind of go on this adventure with me to share a moment of conflict in your life.
Before we do that,
Yeah.
Are we still framing this within the heroes?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then, and then if that's the case, if conflict is a spiritual path for us individually and as a society, then what is a hero? A hero is someone who intentionally engages in conflict.
But reframe that and reframe it as someone who can be comfortable with conflict, metabolize conflict, and leverage conflict, as opposed to look out for conflict. Because, conflict will come one way or the other. Just like in music, you have tension and release. Tensions are necessary. So conflict is a natural part of existence. What we term conflict, another word for it could be challenge. Another word could be competition. And there's a word in the tradition from which I come, an expression called antagonistic cooperation, which is a way of dealing with, understanding, framing, and dealing with conflict in a way in which conflict, challenge, and competition becomes a source of learning and growth rather than something that just tears down and is viewed and reacted to negatively.
Okay. Could you, I would love to hear more about that. Is that from music?
Antagonistic cooperation as a phrase was used very much by two of the individuals who are leading lights in my intellectual and cultural tradition, Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray. You find that expression all throughout their work, throughout a body of letters that was published called Trading Twelves between them in 1950 and 1960. It derives from the hero's journey. So it was a term that Joseph Campbell, who of course dealt with the what he called the monomyth,
mm-hmm.
but he actually, if you want to look at the provenance of it, he derived it from a mythologist named Heinrich Zimmer. And the basic idea is that the hero is of necessity going to have to deal with challenges and conflicts. The question is, how do you deal? What do you do when those moments of truth are there? You know, in the jazz tradition, there's something called a break. And what Albert Murray, who was a mentor of mine, a mentor for Wynton Marsalis, author of about 15 books on American culture, blues, jazz, Black American experience. He would say that the break, which is the cessation of the forward movement in music, symbolizes in the fairy tales or in the stories that where the monster or the antagonist is there and everything stops. So the question is, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? And so what Murray says is that in jazz, you have a model in sound and practice where on the break, that's the moment of truth. That's the moment when in your response, you give and show your best, you know, and you do it with elegance and style, you know, ideally. So there are many famous breaks in jazz music, one of them being Charlie Parker's famous 4-bar improvisation on the break in Night in Tunisia, which is by Dizzy Gillespie. So you listen to that and you hear an incredible flurry of notes and flow and finesse over 4 bars. And it is a very powerful representation of what Murray was talking about. So within jazz music, within the blues idiom tradition, which is the tradition or one of the traditions I was alluding to, you have ways of dealing with obstacles and challenges so that you can actually use it to learn, grow, and demonstrate skill and demonstrate prowess and demonstrates one's ability to not only be resilient, but perhaps even anti-fragile, where the conflict, competition, and challenge actually empowers you to even go to higher realms of finesse, of eloquence, of elegance.
Whoa. What an incredible introduction, not only to that concept, but just to you, Greg. And I'm guessing like the song starts with a theme that's maybe repeated a couple times, and then is the break a silence that's outside of time, and then the improvisational stanza comes in? Is that?
Good question. In the case of Night in Tunisia, there are different parts, but the key point is that there's a forward movement in the music, and then there's a stop. And then there's the solo improvisation, a cadenza, if you will, that follows the break, and then the forward motion movement continues. So in that particular analogy, that's how it works. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, in Night Tunisia is very dramatic. Let's see. It like I said, has different parts. So in the particular one, the version of Night in Tunisia with this famous break by Charlie Parker, there's a guitar player who starts do 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 did did do 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 did did do 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 did did do 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 did did, and then the band comes in. Dee do 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 dee do, and then Dizzy Gillespie. Budu budu bee dee doo dee. Budu budu bee dee lee. Budu budu bee dee doo dee. Booby dee buddy booey. Then it's repeated in the AABA form. Budu budu bee dee doo dee. Budu budu bee dee lee. Budu budu bee dee doo dee. Doo dee 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 doo. Then the bridge. Charlie Parker takes the bridge. Bwee boo be doo bwee be dee doo doo bee. Beep be doo boo doo bwee diddle deep. Diddly. Then 8 again. Butu butu bwee diddle dee. Butu butu bwee diddly. Butu butu dee diddle dee. Booby diddly booty. And then there's another part that leads into the break. Da 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 do li do li do dit. Dee 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 do li do li do dit. Boo dit. And Charlie Parker comes in right at that point and just completely kills it. Okay. So that
technical issues, but audio. A little transition.
There's different ways of describing the same idea, the same concept. But antagonistic cooperation is good because there's tension in the very term. So you have an antagonist, you have something that is rubbing against, right? against in the hero story or in the general story book model, the protagonist is the hero of the story. The antagonist is trying to interfere or stop or whatever what the protagonist is trying to achieve, right? But the antagonist doesn't have to be viewed as evil.
Yeah.
The antagonist doesn't have to be viewed as, wrong. From their vantage point, they're the protagonist of their story, and you're an antagonist to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but the antagonistic part and then the cooperation part, you put them together, you synthesize them, see? So it's a powerful concept that in the work that I do with my wife, a jazz leadership project, the companies and corporations and organizations we work with, there's a real gravitation to that idea because there's something about it that people can get. It's like, challenge, opposition, competition, all that stuff is in there, and conflict. But the question is, how can we develop the knowledge, the skills, the techniques, the practices, the ability to be centered, to not be thrown off so readily, so that when you respond, you can respond spontaneously and wisely. See, this is another dimension of the heroic model. So to me, it's not just about reacting, which is more like you're triggered and you react, and it's not a lot of thought there. It's just reaction. Yeah. But response is different. Response is something that is more considered, allows you to take a beat before actually saying whatever you're going to say or doing whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
Or you're trained enough and you're developed enough so that in your response, it can be an appropriate response in the situation. Again, that's approaching wisdom. Wisdom in this model, this jazz model, when you improvise, when you spontaneously respond in a wise fashion, that is what's appropriate for you and the others and the entire situation. That's looking and feeling more like wisdom, which is another dimension that today in 2023, we don't just need alpha males who are trying to achieve their individual goals, and that's viewed as heroic.
Yeah.
That's inadequate.
So like in the jazz example, some guy who just practiced 23 hours a day of trumpet solos or something, and there's that moment for him to come in and do that 4 bars of solo. He could do that just based on all of his practice and his virtuosity, just to demonstrate, look how good I am. And that is not wisdom, because that is not listening to the song and everything that happened before and what does the song need. That's just like, oh, look at my alpha male solo.
Yeah, I like that. There's a difference between showing off, demonstrating technique for the sake of demonstrating technique. It's like, what is appropriate when you're talking about music? What is appropriate, as you implied, from what came before? What's appropriate in terms of the mood of the song, the tempo of the song, the melody, the harmonic chord changes, all of that. And if someone else just soloed, well, what about what they just played? And if you're a horn player, trumpet, saxophone, trombone, and you've got a rhythm section, bass, drums, guitar, or piano, what is the interactivity that's going on as they support you? And what's the communication going on? So it's a communication model, and it's relational, which takes me to another dimension of heroism. My wife, Jewel Kinch Thomas, in our blog. Our blog is tuneintoleadership.com, which is a blog that is powered by the Jazz Leadership Project. And it's the public facing resource that we have, because we engage with private organizations, private companies, private corporations. But through Tune Into Leadership since 2019, late 2019, we've been able to write about leadership from the perspective and through the perspective of music, jazz, creativity, but also related leadership, not only to music, but from a civic perspective, a cultural perspective, all of those different dimensions. So one of the things that Jewel has done in her work on our blog is deal with the heroine's journey. So we talk about the hero's journey that's often related to a male or masculine approach to heroism. And one distinction that she makes when she writes about the heroine's journey is that unlike the traditional model of the individual hero facing the challenges, going on a journey and an adventure and having to face and fight and avoid temptations and deal with all of the different things that the hero deals with, and then to be able to take, get the reward, the golden elixir, and then bring those gifts back home to the community. It's a beautiful model. The heroine's journey, she says, makes sure that she takes others along on the journey and the process. So it's not an I, me journey. It's a we, us journey. And that's a distinction that also needs to be put, I think, into the mix, because we definitely need to have more relationality from a liberal democracy or classical liberalism perspective. An individuality is very important. Very, very important. But today we need to include individuality, but transcend it through relationality, because without working through cultural and collective intelligence and endeavors, we're not going to be able to, deal with some of these wicked problems. Many of these, it will take a collective effort in concert and in harmony to deal with many of the problems that we have. That's just the only way we're going to do it. So I think we need both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey as a part of the story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so my assumption, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we don't have to fall into the kind of the rigid gender stereotypes of that. Like I could be bringing forth the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And perhaps
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we should. I mean, when you look at it, right? I mean, there's a distinction between male and female and masculine and feminine. Masculinity and femininity are qualities that are usually equated to gender, but are not exclusive to gender. So that as men, you and I both men, we can be masculine. We can be yang at times. We can be feminine or yin at times. And we can and should interplay and interweave those things, because it's through that we are more fully embodied ourselves, and we can better flow and deal with other people. So women have masculine and feminine aspects in them too. So absolutely, that's all just to say that for sure, we need both. And I think we need to enact and embody both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the first times that became viscerally clear to me, I spent a few years traveling in India, which is where my family's from. And as an adult, I spent about 5 years traveling and just trying to understand all these aspects of the culture that I didn't have, growing up in rural America. And so many times the depictions of Krishna and Shiva were just, clear, they're super just androgynous. and clearly meant to be so. And eventually I asked some teachers about this, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like the Radha and Krishna, or Shiva and Shakti, they're just two aspects of the same integrated being that has the best elements of both of these seemingly like dualistic parts, but they're really this like it's all one, and really you want to be, because you want to be like the gods, of course, you want to have all of it and not have to choose."
Right. Exactly. The question becomes, what's appropriate in the moment and in the situation? And there's a flow there. And so you're getting a sense of some of the feeling tones, the qualities that inspire my own view of heroism, and how to, according to your theme, how to manage and leverage conflict.
Yeah. And that actually brings me back to something else. I mean, you've just left many little portals for us to explore, including the Jazz Leadership Project, which I want to get more into. But when you talked about the role of the antagonist, I thought of Star Wars, because you brought up Joseph Campbell, and that connection is clear and deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I in many times, my understanding of the hero's journey, the hero does not want to leave home. The hero would much rather chill.
Doesn't want to answer the call.
Right.
That's
and often like the call has to be repeated in order for the hero to really answer it. Right. And so in that sense, the antagonist is just playing this incredibly pivotal role in contributing to the protagonist. Like the protagonist couldn't be a hero without the call of the antagonist.
Yeah. And when you look at those classic heroes' tales, it's not just the rival in the journey. You also have lovers along the way. You have guides, you have mentors, all of these different characters that are part of the journey. And at various points in our lives, in relationships with others, we play each of those roles. So it's really about viewing it in a way that you can realize that these are energies, forces, dimensions, qualities that we have to tap into in our own life's journeys, right? And to realize that you're going to have shape-shifting going on. So someone who appeared to be a rival at one point could end up being a friend. Someone who was a friend at one point could end up being someone that you're in opposition with. All of those different dimensions are just a part of the reality of life. We know that as adults, every single one of us, unless we've been very, very sheltered, and even if you stay within one little town or one little neighborhood, the human condition is the human condition. So you're going to end up experiencing these dynamics, even if your world is very small. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it seems to me that you speak with the weight of experience. So I'm going to ask you if you're willing to reveal, for you in your own journey, was there a moment that there was the call from a potentially shape-shifting antagonist, teacher, rival, friend that you had to answer?
There have been many of them. Yeah, there have been many. And there have been times when you don't answer the call. I'll give you a for instance. Early in my life, I must have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. I'm going to give you 2 examples of me not answering the call. And sometimes when you don't answer the call, you think back and you might feel guilty or shame, but it actually can prepare you to answer the call when you come to another situation. So I was with my mother, and there was a gentleman who children, they are very much into characters that they see on TV or read in mythological stories or in comic books. So Batman was a hero, and so my mother and this gentleman played as if he was Batman, right? And I was downstairs, he was upstairs, and I guess he shape shifted, and he was playing someone who was supposed to be like either a monster or something that was, Now, my challenge was to go upstairs and face that. In that instance, I didn't go upstairs and face it. If I had, I would have realized that I could face, that antagonist. So in that moment, I didn't answer the call. Another time I didn't answer the call. This would be in 1985, where we have a biannual family reunion. It was formerly called the Thomas Family Reunion because my grandfather, R.H. Thomas Sr., launched the tradition in 79. It's from Waycross, Georgia. And in 1985, the year I graduated from college, we had it in New York. We had it in Long Island with cousins of mine. And we gathered and we were about to have dinner. And my cousin, the mother of the house, she asked me if I wanted to say the prayer. Now, that was the break. That was the break in that moment. Now, I could have done it, and I could have but in that moment, because, in these moments, you either, what do they say? You fight, flight, fight, flee, fawn, or freeze. And I kind of froze, and I didn't do it. So those are instances where I was given the call and I didn't answer. Now, there have been others, as we all have had.
Yeah.
But then there are those where I do answer the call, And so I'm trying to think of a pivotal one that might be evocative of what we're talking about. Let's see. Okay, I'll give you one. So there was a meeting of the Jazz Journalist Organization, JJA, Jazz Journalists Association. And one of the top, I would say, two jazz critics of their generation are Stanley Crouch and Gary Gittins. I knew both of them. Gary's still alive, knew him. And Stanley is someone who I considered a friend. And it was really through Stanley Crouch's work that I became familiar with the work of Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray. So Gary was a round table, and they were talking about jazz in the media and how there used to be much more of a presence of jazz in print media, radio, television, and so much of that was gone. And Gary said, the New York Daily News used to cover jazz consistently. Somebody should approach the Daily News and see if they can write about jazz for them. For me, that was the call. So I went through a process. Now, this is all connected. There's a book here that I'm going to show you that I hope that I have at the ready. It's a book that I wrote the afterword for that's called Murray Talks Music. Albert Murray on jazz and blues, or blues and jazz, one of the two. Gary Gittins wrote the foreword to that same book. It was edited by Paul Devlin. So Gary was a student of Murray's work. Stanley Crouch was someone who was very close to Murray for a long time and introduced Wynton Marsalis to Albert Murray and introduced Albert Murray to Wynton Marsalis. And as they say, the rest is history. Jazz at Lincoln Center, the largest jazz organization in the world, came out of that trio. Wynton Marsalis, Stanley Crouch, and Albert Murray. And there were others involved, of course, but they're primary. So Albert Murray's executor at the time was someone who used to be an executive at the New York Daily News. I tracked down his number. Delbert Spurlock was his name. And in 1997, when Albert Murray got an honorary degree from my alma mater, Hamilton College, Delbert Spurlock came and was present, as was Robert G. O'Mealy of Columbia University. And so I had a connection, but I really wasn't in touch with him. But I got a number. I looked up his number on the New York Daily News. I left a message that I wanted to speak with him. Now, he was no longer at the New York Daily News, but he still had a phone number there. And he just happened to check it. He didn't check it regularly. He happened to check it, maybe 2 months later. And then he called me. And he says, what do you have in mind? I said, I would love to write about jazz for the New York Daily News. There should be jazz coverage in this major New York City daily newspaper in the Big Apple, in the jazz capital, the reputed jazz capital of the world. So he says, okay, I want you to reach out to this person. It was a woman in the human resources department. Spoke to her. She says, I want you to reach out to this editor. Now, it turns out that this particular editor happened to be a Jewish editor, and she was a Black American woman in the HR department. He loved jazz. And at the time, the editor-in-chief of the Daily News was someone who used to be a music critic in Boston. So the stars aligned, as they say, and they gave me a shot. And my very first column was on Chick Corea performing with Wynton Marsalis and the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. And I put so much into that piece, man, and I knocked it out of the park. So I started writing periodically for the New York Daily News. And then at some point, they asked me to be the jazz columnist. They put my picture there. I was writing 2 columns a week. And so if I hadn't answered that call and took the initiative, then that wouldn't have happened. So that's an example of me hearing the call, answering the call, and taking action.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. But not really a great antagonist yet in that story.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right? I mean, everybody seemed to be pretty friendly.
Well, it ended up being antagonists. I tell you that. There sure ended up being some antagonists internally. Okay. You're not going to be able to get away with that. So it was about 2 years. This is 2011 to 2013, and it was a rough time, and still is, the newspaper industry, because the internet was just destroying, so much of that legacy media background. But okay, you want a story with a big antagonist. Okay,
I want the cooperative antagonist. That's what you came in here, you blew me away.
Antagonistic cooperation. Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing is, the truth of the matter is, a lot of times we are our own antagonist. It's not just external; it's internal, man. Like, for us to grow and develop, we have to deal with our internal stuff. Right? So, oh goodness, let's see. Let me give you a one where there was a clear. I mean, I'll give you a clear external one. You want an external antagonist? Okay?
I mean, I'm down with the internal. I mean, there's nothing truer than what you just said for me. That like that the biggest barrier. I mean, I feel it. I mean, today in myself. I know it. I feel it. It's like
right.
Yeah.
So check this out. So My daughter, who's in her mid-20s today, she was born in 1995, September 1st, 1995. Her mother and I are no longer together. She was my first wife. I'm with my second wife now. These things happened. I married young. We were young, and I was immature, and it didn't work out. So in between that not working out and me being with the person who's now my wife, there was Bachelor Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And Bachelor Greg wanted to have various experiences, play the field, and that kind of thing, which I did. And that had a lot of growth and learning to it. There were some thrills to that. But when I started being with her, I had to make a choice, and it wasn't an easy choice to focus my attention, be devoted to her if you want to be with her. And I went through internal struggles, man, because I had been experiencing this bachelorhood, and my first marriage didn't work out, and I didn't necessarily want to be with just one person. But it turns out that I had met her back after I graduated from college in 85. I actually met her, my first girlfriend out of college, a Trinidadian woman. She introduced me to her at the time. So this is like mid 80s. And she made a very strong impression on me at the time. And there was like an 8-year period where we weren't in touch. And I happened to run into her in the Broadway Nassau train station after about 8 years. Like I say, she had made a real strong impression on me. The very first time I saw her, I felt these butterflies on the inside, And I was like, oh my God, am I with the wrong woman? This is early. This is mid 80s. So we ran into each other and transferred numbers and got in touch, had lunch. But by then we were both in our own situations. We could not do anything ourselves. And there was about a 2-year period where we built a strong communication, strong friendship. And both of us ended up being out of the situations that we were in and the relationships we were in. But I was in that transition period, and I wasn't ready to what they call settle down. I would say settle up in my case. Okay. And I had to go through the internal battle of what are your priorities? What is important to you as a person, as a man, as an adult? How do you see the rest of your life going? Do you want to be, now I'm looking at this now from the perspective of having made the choice. We've been married since 2008, and it's been now almost 25 years that I have been solely and exclusively devoted to my beloved. Okay. So I'm speaking from that perspective, but then I was like, I didn't have the maturity to be able to make that choice. So there were a couple of times, this is way before we were married, where, at first, because she was new to being free, it was like, okay, well, it's okay if you want to do that. Then it was like, well, that's not who I am. And so we weren't together. It took some space and then came back together, and all that kind of stuff. Until one time, man, she said, look, you know how I feel about you, but if you want to live that lifestyle, then you do that. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. And I remember I was at 870 St. Nicholas Avenue on 153rd in Harlem. And I began crying my heart out to such an extent, it was uncontrollable. I felt that I was like outside of my body looking at myself, uncontrollably crying. And that was one of the times when I was like, whoa, you got some real deep feelings for this woman. But I still wasn't ready. Another time, it was a woman who had visited me. She just had her number there. We hadn't done anything, but that didn't matter. She saw the number and she said, I can't do this. So I spent a weekend trying to win her back. And when I say a weekend, I spent the entire weekend working on a tape, and a cassette tape that had jazz and R&B that we listened to in our lives. It was like the soundtrack to our lives, you know. I sent her poems by Shakespeare, Rumi, you know. I just did whatever I could do to woo her back. And in time, I was able to. But with that time, when she found that phone number, we walked from 153rd and St. Nicholas all the way over to 155th and Broadway. And it was during that walk that the transformation happened within me. I knew that if I didn't make a change within myself, if I didn't answer the responsible, devoted, monogamous path, that I was going to lose this woman. And I knew within me as we took that walk that that shit had dropped away. But she had heard that before, but I knew within me that I had made the transition. Now, it took a long time, relatively speaking, for her to have that trust, right? But the transformation had happened where it was we call a subject-object relationship. When I was in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of the in-betweenness, the liminal space between monogamy and polyamory, it was like, it was confusing. But once I made that decision, I could look at the former me as an object and say, here's where your head was. Here's where your heart was. And I could look at it and understand that immature state. To me, that's immaturity. And now I was able to actually, and this is part of the hero's journey too, from a male perspective, because part of that story is, are you going to be prepared to be with the woman of your life or the woman of your dreams? Are you going to be ready to come back home to Penelope, like Odysseus? Are you going to be ready? So that was part of my hero's journey, but it was internal. But check this out. In that in-between period, there was a gentleman, a very handsome gentleman that started to court her. Okay? He was a photographer. He had green eyes. He was a light-skinned guy. And he was a nice guy. He was a really nice guy. I couldn't not like him because he was a nice guy, and I couldn't blame him for, and that gave me, even more incentive. When you have someone there who could possibly take away the love of your life, you're going to do what you can to make sure that you win. At least I did. You know what I mean? So don't think that there weren't some other antagonists out there.
Yeah.
So that happened too. That was there. But the reality is I grew up. I transcended the immature self. And I came into my own really as a mature man, in that dimension.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a long way around, but that hopefully is a story that answers what you were looking for.
Oh my God. Beautiful story. Answers everything I was looking for about conflict and about this antagonistic cooperation or antagonist. Is that cooperative antagonism?
Yeah. No. Antagonistic cooperation. That's it.
Yeah. And then so then my question after that is, and thank you so much for being willing to share that, is having gone through that journey of maturation, as you put it, did you see or you experience the benefits of the mature Greg Thomas in these other areas of your life?
That's a great question. What a great question. Absolutely. Yeah. Because when you get serious about one area of your life, it could and should impact the rest of the areas of your life. Okay. So we were together and we building a life together, and we got married. Now there's a story about the engagement, and I'm a romantic, so I could tell you about all these stories. But the bottom line is that we were building a life together. So we bought a home in New Rochelle, and she was working at the Theater of the Riverside Church, and I'm doing my work as a writer, as a producer, consultant. And I ended up, like I said, writing for the Daily News. But that only lasted 2 years. And then she had some transitions, and we had to face financial challenges.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, we had to face financial challenges, and that can either make you or break you as a couple. But we stayed together, with I had a daughter, she had 2 sons, and we came out of that challenge even stronger. I mention this to answer your question, because then how serious are you going to be about your career? How serious are you going to be about what friends you have and what friends you don't have? Because when you get serious in one area, it definitely goes into other areas too, where you have to question how you use your time, how you use your attention, both in your avocation and your vocation, all of that comes into question. And for us, going back to the Jazz Leadership Project, because we tried various ventures. We had a online business called Voices of Romance, where we had love poetry, and they were like erotic, I'd say soft erotic products, like, oils and that kind of flowers. We didn't go anything where it's like, X-rated or anything like that. But it was like we had such a wonderful that we wanted to find a way to kind of share that. But that was more like a hobby as opposed to a business. We did jazz productions in Harlem, in Westchester, Midtown, and different places. And it's not an easy road, because jazz is not a popular art form anymore. So when you're trying to be a producer and promoter of live performances, there are just economic realities that, it's not easy to sustain. So when it came time for us to launch the Jazz Leadership Project, here's another challenge: to go from a nonprofit mindset to a for-profit mindset, to go from a nonprofit mindset where you are trying to get grants and donations to for-profit where you get investors, or you bootstrap it yourself. We had done the bootstrapping already. When it came to the Jazz Leadership Project, I said, listen, we bootstrapped it. We've tried to do it yourself, all of that. I said, for this one, for it to be done right, we need to get some investors, angel investors. And they come in at a relatively small, this is not venture capital. It's like, startup funds, And we were able to do that. And we are very successful today. I mean, some of our client list, Google, JP Morgan Chase, Verizon, TD Bank, Eaton Corporation, the Center for Policing Equity. These are all clients of ours within a 7-year period. So that was another challenge, to make that transition from a for-profit a nonprofit mindset to a for-profit mindset, a bootstrapper approach where you just do everything yourself and you hustle, to like, you're still gonna have to do it yourself, but have a cushion of some damn money to work with. You know what I mean? So these are different challenges that come up in different pivot points that say, are you ready to take it to the next level? Are you ready to face something you never faced before? Neither one of us had ever raised money to run a business, but we did, and we faced that challenge. And now we've got the results.
Yeah. And I could see how, I mean, the thread you're drawing is kind of like monogamy. It's focus, it's concentration, it's commitment, it's being willing to put it on the line. I mean, taking money from other people is a huge risk, right? Like
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And let me say this for folks who are listening, because look, I'm going to be 60 in a couple of months. So like you said, yeah, this is lived experience I'm talking about. This is not, theory. I'm doing this based on a lot of experience and a lot of deep study. And one of the things I want to share is that in my quarter century with my wife, one of the things I realized is that it's not about it getting better and better and better. That's an orientation. Some things will get better. It's more about it getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. That's what I found, that our relationship has gotten deeper and has more layers to it. You know what I mean? And that's profound. And you see some of these couples who make it together, and they're together for many, many decades. I think that's a part of what it is. It's a deepening of those bonds and the journey that you're taking together as you are helping transform each other, in your lives. So that's something that I've been thinking about, but I hadn't really shared in any kind of public conversation. So this is the first time I've mentioned about the deepening versus it getting better, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And it's very like so much, to speak kind of in integral terms, so much of the external progress, modern, rational, it's all about the more, right? The consumer capitalist thing. It's about the bigger, the better, the more, and to be able to be like, put kind of like a new lens or a break on them. Like, yeah, the desire for me, the desire for growth and for improvement. Like I'm kind of like always behind that. I'm into that, but it, expresses itself in different ways, and in relationships, and in this, kind of very primal relationship in all of our lives, that of the partner. It's about the deepening, not the mooring.
Exactly, man. Yeah, definitely. So hopefully that will touch someone out there who's listening, who aspires to that, or who wonders what it would be like. Because I'm serious, man. I look at monogamy done right as very advanced, because in some ways you could say that as mammals, it may not be how we were built, because just from a biological perspective, it's like you need to propagate. So, the impetus is for that to happen, So to be able to devote yourself and to grow and deepen with one person is really beautiful, And there's a lot of forms out here. There are all kind of forms of relationships, over time, pre-modern and modern, different configurations. But for me, this has worked out very beautifully. So I look at that as a part of the hero's journey also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Greg. So to close this out today, I want to bring us back to conflict. And I want to think about this jazz leadership project that you've mentioned a couple of times, and I'm very curious. So what is the relationship between that project and the incredible amount of conflict in all of these different ways that appears to be just kind of rending our society now, whether it's like the culture wars, woke stuff, or the abortion stuff, or, all the different things.
Sure. I'll have to speak about more than just the Jazz Leadership Project. I'll have to speak about some of my other work. And you can look at it as a whole. The Jazz Leadership Project, in terms of its methodology and its praxis, theory into practice, has 4 principles and 6 practices. The 4 principles are, and I'm just going to stick with the principles. You've got individual excellence. It's like your desire to become your best in what you do, and to work on the skills that will make that possible. Antagonistic cooperation is the second principle that is a part of the model, so that you face challenges, conflict, and opposition in a way to grow and learn and deepen. I'll add that. Then the next 2 are shared leadership and ensemble mindset. So the first 2 are more individually oriented. The second 2 are more collective or group oriented. Shared leadership is based on a respect that I have for your capacity to be a leader in your own right, and for you to do your best in your capacity, your roles, your functions. Ensemble mindset is what we call like a collective intelligence through a co-creative facility. It's collective. It's like there's a scholar who wrote a book called Group Genius. It's like when everything comes together as a group and you're in flow, you're in the group, you're in the zone. And that's ensemble mindset, where the parts are not just the parts, but the sum is greater than the parts. So those are the 4 principles. So we see that having application for your development as an individual in your role and function in what you do. And that could be in the workplace or outside of the workplace. They can really apply to any kind of projects you're working on, any kind of endeavor, and how you then work together with other people. Right? But because the Jazz Leadership Project works primarily with corporations, when it comes to, and that's the business entrepreneurship, when it comes to social entrepreneurship, there are 2 particular projects that I'm working on. One is called the Omni-American Future Project, which is a collaboration among the Jazz Leadership Project and 2 Jewish organizations, the American Sephardi Federation and the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement. And we have joined forces for this project to fight against bigotry in the forms particularly of anti-Semitism and racism, and to fight for an omni-American future, by which I mean an omni-Americans. The Omni-Americans was the title of Albert Murray's first book. And remember, I told you he's a mentor of mine.
Yeah.
And the Omni-Americans is like it's like a meta concept, the Americanness of Americans. In other words, in your fully fleshed whole perspective of what an American is and can be, that's an omni-American. Where do you find the principles, going back to principles, of America contained? Where do you find the ideals of America contained in our founding documents? In the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, and the 14th and 15th Amendments, in the Gettysburg Address, in Lincoln's second inaugural address, certain key pivotal moments in the history of this country, with all the contradictions that are there, with all the ways that those who wrote that fell short of those ideals. We know that, yes. But those ideas and ideals have inspired millions of people since they were written, and they continue to. So that Omni American is an embodiment of those principles and those values, to not only espouse them, but to live them, to be it with oneself and with others. So that project is projecting that and is striving to bring attention to that. That's one example of the social entrepreneur work. The other example is what I call deracialization. Race is an idea that, in terms of its hierarchical ordering, in terms of creating stereotypes and norms based on categorizing people on the basis of their phenotypic characteristics, on the base of their skin color, the size of their head, the size of their nose and lips and all of that. And then being able to say, well, these people are like this, but we are like this. And to hierarchy and say, well, these people here who are categorized as white are at the height. And particularly if they were white male property owners, excuse me, and the people who are darker and who are enslaved, they're at the low end of the bottom of the totem pole. And then we create social structures, laws, institutions that reinforce what Albert Murray called the folklore of white supremacy. I have studied and I've collaborated with people who have taken a very close look at not only race, but the process through which race becomes an idea that's infused and embedded in the society, in our minds. That's called racialization. That's the process through which racial groups are created. Then you have a racial worldview, seeing the world through the lens of race. You mentioned integral theory, someone who has been in conversation with integral theory, Roy Boscar. You know, he has a model of critical realism, and he had something called a demi-reality, which is like disunity within difference. You can have difference. You don't have to have disunity within difference. So race is an idea that's a demi-reality. You have disunity and discord based on difference. So you have a racial worldview. You have racialization as a process, and you have the idea of race itself. You put those together, what's the result? Racism. So the process of deracialization is stepping back from that whole miasma, that whole cesspool, and not accepting racialization for myself or for you and others. Getting off that hamster wheel of death and destruction. And that's another project that I'm working on, and I'm collaborating with others who share the same mindset and frameworks. They call it non-racial worldview, as Carlos Hoyt Jr. Dr. Sheena Mason calls it the theory of racelessness. And these have antecedents. There are people, Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray, they emphasize culture way more than race, and they could see through the fallacy and falsity of race. Alain Locke, who was called like the father of the Harlem Renaissance, who was the editor of the New Negro volume, was a philosopher. He saw through it. It was more about culture and cosmopolitanism than race. Gene Toomer, the author of Cain, he saw through it, didn't accept race. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Are Watching God and other works, she didn't accept it. But they were precursors who pointed the way, but because race was so strong and racism was so powerful, it's like people looked at them and they're like, well, are they crazy? But race isn't natural. Race isn't biological. And you can say it's a social construction. Yeah, well, that may be the case on the right side of the four quadrants, of Wilber's four quadrants, particularly the lower right, in terms of social structures, institutions. It's okay. It's a social construct. But to move beyond it, to transcend it, to transcend race and include culture, I think we're going to have to deal with race, racialization, and racial worldview, separate ourselves from that, emphasize what I call cultural intelligence and eventually cultural wisdom, so that we can stop being blinded by this foolishness, this nonsense concept. So that's another project that I'm working on, deracialization. So taken together, I see us getting clarity on who we are as individual human beings who are having a spiritual experience. We're human beings who are having a spiritual experience. And ourselves are multiplicitous. We're not any one thing, certainly not race, but not even a particular ethnicity. We have different roles and stuff. We have different aspects to ourselves. And let's integrate all those individually. But then we have our relations with other people. So this is the I, we, it dimension. So the I, get yourself together and realize that you are a multiplicity, that you, as Walt Whitman said, hold multitudes within you, but then in your relations with other people, look at them as souls and spirits having a human experience. Don't be snowed by what they are just externally. You have to deal with them as individuals. I think you should. And they each have their own identifications. But on a deeper level of your relationships, you don't have to allow those things, those differences, to become the basis for disunity and discord. You can have disagreement, but it doesn't have to be discord, or it doesn't have to be where we look at each other as enemies rather than as opponents who may look at something differently, So we getting ourselves together, getting our relationships with one another together, and then getting our institutions together and our social structures together. There's a lineage of thought. I mentioned some of them. I mentioned Elaine Locke, Jean Tooman, Zora Neale Hurston. Before them, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, early W.E.B. Du Bois, Anna Julia Cooper, and on through the ones I mentioned, to Ellison Murray, and then there's people like Charles Johnson, novelist, writer, artist, Toni Morrison, aspects of her work and thought, for sure. And there are others, but this person here, Danielle Allen, author of this book, Justice by Means of Democracy, where she lays out a political philosophy in which encompasses all those different elements, the I, the we, and the it, and how we can achieve a state that she calls a social, political, and economic structure in which the principle of non-domination is critical. This has been the problem with colonialism, with slavery during modernity. It's based on domination. So she has a model based on non-domination in these different dimensions, including the lower right quadrant, social structures and institutions. So she is someone who is an exemplar of this tradition, this omni-American blues idiom wisdom tradition that I think is a contribution to help America become better and be better, and therefore can also help the world be and become better and deeper.
Thank you, Greg.
You're very welcome.
Thus concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. On behalf of myself and Martine, my producer, thank you for listening. And if you never want to miss another episode, if you want to have transcripts of everything you've heard, if you want to be in delightful one-on-one communication with me, and you want to hear about upcoming live events, sign up for our newsletter. You can go to momentumlab.com/podcast and get all the information.